The massive black ships of the Vaxian Empire dropped out of hyperspace like deadly shadows against the stars. Their fleet stretched for kilometers, each warship the size of a small city. The aliens had arrived at Earth's doorstep, and they came, with only one purpose: conquest. Commander Velthara walked slowly across the bridge of her flagship, the Dark Sovereign. Her tall, pale figure moved with the confidence of someone who had never tasted defeat. Behind her, the bridge crew worked quietly at their stations, their movements precise and mechanical. They had done this dance 847 times before. Earth would be no different. She stopped at the main viewing screen and stared at the small blue planet hanging in the distance. Such a tiny, insignificant world. Her intelligence reports lay spread across the command table, and every page told the same story. Humans were pathetic. They barely knew how to leave their own planet. Their fastest ships moved slower than Vaxian cargo vessels. Their weapons were crude explosives that would barely scratch Vaxian armor. "Primitive creatures," she muttered, picking up a datapad showing human military capabilities. "They still use chemical rockets to reach their own moon. How did such weaklings even survive to develop spaceflight?" Her second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Corvash, approached with the standard conquest protocols. "Commander, shall we begin the usual intimidation sequence? A few orbital strikes on their military bases should make them surrender within the hour." Velthara waved her hand dismissively. "Not yet. Let's see how these humans react first. Sometimes the primitive ones provide entertainment before they break." She turned to her communications officer. "Send them our standard surrender demand. Give them the usual speech about the might of the Vaxian Empire." Meanwhile, far beneath the Pacific Ocean, Captain Li Hyun sat in a chair that shouldn't have existed according to every alien intelligence report ever written about Earth. The command center around him hummed with technology that made Vaxian computers look like stone tools. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing real-time positions of every enemy ship. The walls themselves seemed alive with flowing data streams and tactical information. Li Hyun was a man in his 40s with calm, steady eyes that had seen too much. His uniform bore no recognizable human military insignia because officially his organization didn't exist. For 200 years, his people had worked in absolute secrecy, preparing for this exact moment. "Sir, the alien fleet has taken standard conquest formation," reported Lieutenant Park Soo from her station. She was young, maybe 25, but her fingers moved across the control panels with the skill of someone who had trained for this her entire life. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies now." The alien message filled the command center with its arrogant tone. Commander Velthara's image appeared on the main screen, her alien features twisted with superiority. "Primitive humans of Earth," her voice echoed through the chamber. "You now face the might of the Vaxian Empire. We have conquered 847 worlds before yours. Surrender immediately, and we will allow some of you to live as slaves. Resist, and we will turn your world into ash. You have 6 hours to comply." The younger officers in the command center shifted uncomfortably. Even knowing what they knew, hearing such casual threats against their homeworld made their blood boil. But Li Hyun remained perfectly calm. He had been waiting for this conversation his entire career. "Lieutenant Park, open a channel to the alien fleet," he said quietly. "Channel open, sir." Li Hyun leaned back in his chair and spoke in the most polite tone he could manage. "Greetings, Commander Velthara of the Vaxian Empire. We have received your generous offer of conquest. However, such an important decision requires careful consideration from our planetary government. We respectfully request 72 hours to discuss your terms and prepare our response." Up on the Dark Sovereign, the alien bridge crew erupted in surprised laughter. Commander Velthara's eyes widened with amusement. In all her years of conquest, no primitive species had ever asked for time to consider surrender. Most begged immediately or fired their pathetic weapons in desperate panic. "Did they just ask for more time to surrender?" asked Corvash, barely containing his mirth. "It appears they want to negotiate," Velthara replied, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How refreshingly naive. Very well, primitive humans. You may have your 72 hours to decide how you wish to die." She cut the communication and turned to her fleet commanders. "Position all ships for orbital bombardment. When their time expires, we'll destroy one of their cities as a demonstration. Then they'll understand the futility of resistance. Back. In the hidden command center, Li Hyun watched the alien ships move into attack positions. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The aliens saw what they expected to see: a weak, frightened world buying time before inevitable surrender. "Sir," Park Soo said quietly, "Phase 1 is complete. They've taken the bait perfectly." Li Hyun nodded slowly. Around the command center, his officers began their final preparations. Hidden throughout the solar system, ships that had remained invisible for decades started their approach vectors. On Earth itself, defense systems that had never appeared on any scanner began powering up. The Vaxian Empire thought they were dealing with primitives. They had no idea they had just walked into the most carefully planned trap in galactic history. Earth had been preparing for this moment for 2 centuries, and now the real game was about to begin. The countdown timer on Commander Velthara's bridge showed exactly 0 when the human response arrived. For 72 hours, she had watched Earth, with growing anticipation, imagining the terror spreading across the primitive planet below. Her fleet had maintained perfect formation, weapons charged, and ready for the demonstration that would break human resistance forever. The communication alert chimed softly across the bridge of the Dark Sovereign. Every alien officer turned toward the main screen, expecting to see desperate human leaders begging for mercy or offering tribute. Instead, they heard something that made no sense at all. The human voice was calm, almost bored. There was no fear, no desperation, no pleading. Just a simple statement delivered with the casual tone of someone giving directions to a lost traveler. "Vaxian Fleet, you have had your 72 hours. Leave our system within 24 hours or discover why you should have studied us more carefully." The silence on the bridge lasted exactly 3 seconds before it shattered into explosive laughter. Commander Velthara doubled over, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. Her officers slapped their consoles and wheezed with mirth. Even the normally serious Korvash was grinning like a fool. "Did they just threaten us?" gasped Lieutenant Zexara between fits of giggling. "These primitives who can barely reach their own moon just threatened the Vaxian Empire." Commander Velthara wiped her eyes and struggled to compose herself. In 847 conquests, she had never encountered such delicious arrogance from a primitive species. "Oh, this is wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. They think they can intimidate us with words." She straightened her uniform and walked to the weapons control station, her amusement turning cold and deadly. "Communications, broadcast this message to Earth on all frequencies. I want every human to hear what happens to species that dare threaten the Vaxian Empire." The main screen lit up with Velthara's image as she addressed the planet below. "Foolish humans, your response has sealed your fate. As punishment for your insolence, we will now destroy your moon. Watch the sky and understand the power you have chosen to defy." She turned to her weapons officer with theatrical flourish. "Target Luna, full power. I want nothing left but debris and regret." The weapons officer, a young Vaxian named Thekvar, began inputting targeting coordinates with practiced efficiency. "Plasma cannons charging, Commander. Target lock acquired. We can fire in 30 seconds. Throughout the Vaxian fleet, similar scenes played out on dozens of bridges. Officers laughed and joked about human stupidity while preparing to demonstrate why the Vaxian Empire ruled 847 worlds. Their massive weapons began to glow with deadly energy as targeting systems locked onto Earth's moon. But then something impossible happened. Sensor technician Crixon had been monitoring local space for threats, a routine precaution during conquest operations. His screens had shown empty void for 3 days straight, exactly matching their intelligence. Reports about human space capabilities, but now his instruments were screaming warnings that made no sense. "Commander," he called out, his voice cutting through the bridge laughter, "I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the system. Multiple contacts all around us." Velthara turned from the weapons station, irritation replacing amusement. "What are you talking about? Our scans show empty space. Check your equipment." Crixan's hands flew over his controls, running diagnostic after diagnostic. Every result came back the same. "Ma'am, my equipment is functioning perfectly. I'm detecting enormous power sources at every compass point. They're surrounding us. The laughter on the bridge died instantly. Every officer turned to stare at Crixan's displays, watching impossible readings scroll across multiple screens. Energy signatures were appearing everywhere, each one representing something massive and previously invisible. "That's impossible," whispered Corvash. "Our intelligence reports confirmed these humans have no stealth technology. They barely have fusion reactors." Commander Velthara grabbed Crixan's shoulder and stared at his screens. The readings were undeniable. Hundreds of massive objects were materializing around her fleet, each one showing power outputs that dwarfed Vaxian technology. Then space itself began to change. It started as subtle ripples in the starfield, like heat shimmer on a summer day. But the distortions grew stronger and more defined until the very fabric of space seemed to be peeling away like old paint. What emerged from behind that cosmic camouflage left the entire Vaxian fleet speechless. Ships, hundreds of them. Sleek, elegant vessels that moved with impossible grace through the void. Their hulls gleamed with materials the Vaxians had never seen, and their design spoke of technology centuries beyond anything in the Empire's databases. They appeared in perfect formation around the Vaxian fleet, as if they had been waiting in position for hours. Captain Kim Min stood on the bridge of his ship, the Silent Thunder, watching the alien fleet's confusion with cold satisfaction. He was a man in his 30s with sharp eyes and steady hands, trained from birth for exactly this moment. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency at stations that hummed with power beyond Vaxian comprehension. "Sir, all ships report ready," announced his tactical officer, Lieutenant Yu Bin. "The aliens appear to be in complete shock. Their weapons are still charging, but they haven't moved to engage." Kim Min nodded slowly, studying the tactical display that showed both fleets in perfect detail. Every Vaxian ship was exactly where his computers had predicted they would be. 2 centuries of preparation had led to this moment of revelation. "Open fleet-wide communications," he ordered. "Let's give our guests a moment to count their opposition before we proceed to the next phase." His voice carried across all human frequencies, calm and professional. "All ships maintain current positions. Hold weapons at ready, but do not engage. Let them understand what they're facing before we show them what we can do." On the Dark Sovereign, Commander Velthara stared at the tactical display with growing horror. Her 200-ship fleet, which had seemed overwhelming against primitive Earth, now appeared pathetically small, surrounded by nearly 500 human vessels. Each enemy ship radiated power signatures that suggested weapons and defenses far beyond Vaxian capabilities. "How is this possible?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of her ship's systems. "Where did they come from? How long have they been watching us?" The answer hung unspoken in the bridge's terrified silence. The humans hadn't just been watching, they had been waiting. Commander Velthara felt her legs go weak as she stared at the tactical displays surrounding her command chair. The numbers made no sense. Where her intelligence reports had promised a single primitive world with barely functional space travel, her sensors now showed a fleet that made her own forces look like children playing with toys. 500 human ships hung in space around her fleet, each one radiating power signatures that her computers couldn't even categorize. The sleek vessels moved with perfect coordination, their formations so precise they seemed to flow like liquid metal through the void. This wasn't the desperate last stand of a primitive species. This was the careful positioning of a military force that had been planning this moment for generations. "Run the scans again," she ordered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Check everything twice. There has to be an error." Her sensor operator, Crixan, worked frantically at his station. His hands shook as he ran diagnostic after diagnostic, hoping to find some malfunction that would explain away the impossible readings. But every scan came back with the same terrifying results. "Commander, all systems are functioning normally," he reported, his voice cracking with stress. "The readings are accurate. We're surrounded by a fleet nearly 3 times our size, and their technology." He paused, staring at his instruments in disbelief. "Ma'am, I've never seen anything like this. Their power output alone suggests weapons capabilities far beyond our understanding." Meanwhile, high above Earth, in a space station that had never appeared on any Vaxian scan, Lieutenant Colonel Choi Hanna prepared to reveal the full scope of humanity's deception. She was a woman in her late 30s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that held the weight of absolute responsibility. For 20 years, she had commanded Earth's orbital defense grid, waiting for this exact moment. The command center around her buzzed with controlled activity as hundreds of officers managed systems that technically shouldn't exist. Holographic displays showed real-time positions of every ship in the solar system, along with detailed analyses of Vaxian technology, psychology, and tactical preferences. This wasn't improvisation. This was the execution of a plan 2 centuries in the making. "Ma'am, all defense platforms are online and ready," reported Major Park Ju, her second in command. "The aliens still haven't detected our orbital installations. They're completely focused on the fleet." Choi Hana nodded grimly. "Good. Let them. Count our ships first. They need to understand the scale of their miscalculation before we show them what we've really built." She activated her personal communications array and opened a channel to Earth's primary command center. "Captain Lee, this is Orbital Command. Phase 2 is complete. The enemy fleet is in perfect position and they're beginning to understand what they're facing." Down in the hidden command center beneath the Pacific, Captain Lee Hyun watched the unfolding revelation with careful satisfaction. Around him, his officers monitored alien communications, listening to the growing panic spreading through the Vaxian fleet as their situation became clear. "Sir, we're intercepting massive amounts of chatter from the enemy ships," reported Lieutenant Park Soo. "Their officers are demanding explanations from their intelligence divisions. Several ships are requesting permission to retreat." Lee Hyun smiled coldly. "Not yet. They need to understand the full scope of what they've walked into. Signal all fleet commanders. Begin the next phase of revelation." The truth was simple, elegant, and absolutely terrifying for anyone who had spent their career conquering primitive worlds. For 200 years, humanity had maintained the most successful military deception in galactic history. Every probe the Vaxians had sent to study Earth had encountered exactly what humans wanted them to encounter: a struggling civilization barely capable of reaching its own moon. But the reality was something else entirely. While one branch of humanity had remained on Earth, maintaining the facade of primitive development, another branch had spread silently through the galaxy. They had built colonies, established hidden bases, and developed technology that made most galactic civilizations look like Stone Age tribes. The Vaxians thought they were attacking a single, helpless world. In reality, they had stumbled into the heart of an interstellar empire that had been watching them for decades, learning their tactics, studying their weaknesses, and preparing for exactly this confrontation. Back on the Dark Sovereign, Commander Velthara finally grasped the horrible truth. Her tactical officer, a veteran named Mordan, approached her with a datapad containing analysis of the human fleet. His face was pale with fear. "Commander, we've completed preliminary scans of their weapon systems," he reported, his voice shaking. "The energy signatures suggest destructive capabilities at least 10 times greater than our most powerful ships. And their defensive systems—" He paused, swallowing hard. "Ma'am, I don't think our weapons could even scratch their hulls." Velthara took the datapad with trembling fingers. The numbers told a story that turned her blood to ice. The Vaxian Empire, which had conquered 847 worlds through superior technology and overwhelming force, now faced an enemy that outmatched them in every possible category. "How long have they been watching us?" she whispered, more to herself than to her officers. "How long have they known we were coming?" The answer came from across space as Captain Kang Do's voice filled every Vaxian ship. He was the commander of humanity's forward fleet, a man with a calm voice that carried absolute authority. His words were delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather, but they carried implications that shattered everything. The Vaxians thought they knew about the galaxy. "Vaxian fleet, we hope you're beginning to understand your situation. What you see around you represents less than 5% of humanity's active military forces. We have been aware of your empire's existence for 73 years. We have observed your conquest patterns, studied your technology, and prepared appropriate responses to your inevitable arrival." He paused, letting that information sink in before continuing. You now have 23 hours to make a decision. You can return to your empire with a message, or you can discover what happens to civilizations that threaten Earth. We suggest you choose wisely. Commander Velthara sank into her command chair, the weight of realization crushing down on her shoulders. The Vaxian Empire hadn't been expanding into primitive space at all. They had been walking step by step into the most carefully constructed trap in galactic history, and now, surrounded by forces beyond their comprehension, they were about to learn that the hunters had become the hunted. Commander Velthara stood frozen on her bridge, staring at the overwhelming human fleet that surrounded her forces. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to find some way to escape this impossible situation. But she was a Vaxian commander, heir to an empire that had never backed down from any enemy. The thought of running from primitives, even impossibly advanced ones, burned in her chest like acid. "Ma'am, we should consider withdrawal," suggested her tactical officer Morden, his voice barely controlled. "These humans clearly have capabilities we didn't anticipate. Perhaps we should return to report this development to High Command." Velthara's eyes flashed with anger. "The Vaxian Empire does not retreat from primitives," she snarled, her pride overwhelming her common sense. "These humans may have hidden ships and fancy technology, but they're still the same species that couldn't even leave their planet a few centuries ago. We are Vaxians. We have conquered 847 worlds." She turned to address her entire bridge crew, her voice rising with desperate conviction. "Look around you. Yes, they have more ships than we expected. Yes, their technology appears advanced, but we are warriors of the Empire. Her ancestors didn't build the greatest military force in the galaxy by running away from unexpected challenges." The bridge fell silent, except for the hum of ship systems. Every officer could see the tactical displays showing them hopelessly outnumbered. But Velthara's words stirred something deep in their warrior culture. They had never retreated. They had never failed to conquer a world once they committed to battle. "All ships," Velthara announced over the fleet communications, "assume attack formation. We will show these humans what happens when primitives dare to threaten the Vaxian Empire. Charge all weapons systems. Prepare for full engagement." Throughout the Vaxian fleet, 200 warships began their deadly dance. Massive engines flared to life as the vessels moved into their practiced battle formations. Weapons that could crack planets began building energy charges, shields designed to withstand. The fury of stars powered up to maximum strength. The aliens were preparing to fight with everything they had. But deep beneath Earth's surface, in a facility buried so far down it touched the planet's molten core, Major Yu Jin watched the alien fleet's movements with calm professionalism. She was a small woman with steady hands and eyes that missed nothing, sitting before a control panel that represented humanity's deepest secret. The room around her looked like something from a science fiction movie. Crystalline displays floated in mid-air, showing energy patterns that spanned the entire solar system. Cables of unknown materials disappeared into the floor, connecting to systems that drew power directly from Earth's core. This was the Null Protocol Chamber, and Eugene was its guardian. "Major, the alien fleet is moving to attack positions," reported her assistant, Captain Oh-Sung. "All human ships are maintaining defensive formations as ordered. Shall we proceed?" "With demonstration." Eugene nodded slowly. For 30 years she had trained for this moment, hoping it would never come. The Null Protocol was humanity's ultimate trump card, a technology so advanced and so terrifying that its very existence was known to only a handful of people across all human space. "Initiate Null Protocol," she said quietly. "Full spectrum shutdown. On all Vaxian vessels. Duration 30 minutes, authorization code Omega-77. Her fingers moved across controls that responded to quantum-level commands. Deep beneath the Earth, systems that had taken decades to build began their work. Energy patterns invisible to any known scanner reached out across space, seeking every piece of Vaxian technology in the solar system. On the Dark Sovereign, Commander Velthara was in the middle of issuing final attack orders when her world suddenly went black. The lights died first. Every illumination system throughout the ship simply stopped working, plunging the bridge into absolute darkness. Emergency lighting should have activated immediately, but nothing happened. The air recycling systems went silent. The artificial gravity failed, sending every crew member floating helplessly in zero gravity. But most terrifying of all, the life support system stopped functioning. "What's happening?" Velthara screamed into the darkness, but her voice seemed muffled and strange in the dead air. Around her, she could hear her crew members gasping and shouting in confusion as they floated in the black void that their bridge had become. The same scene played out simultaneously across every Vaxian ship in the fleet. 200 massive warships, each one carrying 50 crew members, suddenly became floating tombs drifting silently through space. 10,000 alien warriors found themselves trapped in powerless hulks, their mighty vessels reduced to metal coffins in an instant. Emergency. Communication systems that should have activated automatically remained dead. Backup power supplies that should have provided days of life support never engaged. Even basic tools and personal devices stopped working. It was as if the concept of technology itself had simply ceased to exist aboard every Vaxian vessel. Admiral. Nam Su's voice echoed through the solar system, broadcast on frequencies that reached every human ship and somehow penetrated the dead Vaxian vessels as well. He was humanity's senior commander, a man whose calm voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Vaxian fleet, you are experiencing what we call the Null Protocol. This is what we do to civilizations that choose aggression over wisdom. Your technology functions because we permit it to function. Your weapons work because we allow them to work. Your life support operates because we choose to let you breathe." Inside the Dark Sovereign, Commander Velthara floated in the darkness, her hands grasping desperately for something solid to hold on to. The air was already becoming stale, and she could hear her crew members struggling to breathe in the enclosed space. Terror, unlike anything she had ever experienced, gripped her heart as she realized the full implications of what was happening. The humans hadn't attacked them with weapons. They hadn't fired a single shot or launched a single missile. Instead, they had simply reached out across space and turned off everything that made Vaxian civilization possible. Every piece of technology, every system that kept them alive, every tool that made them powerful, all of it existed only because humanity allowed it to exist. Admiral Nam Su's voice continued its terrible message. "For the next 30 minutes you will drift helplessly while you consider your choices. You can return to your empire with our message, or you can discover what happens next. This is our final warning. Choose wisely." The minutes crawled by like hours. In the suffocating darkness of their dead ships, 10,000 Vaxian warriors experienced true helplessness for the first time in their lives. They had built their empire on superior technology, overwhelming force, and the fear they inspired in primitive species. Now they discovered what it felt like to be completely at someone else's mercy. Some crew members panicked, screaming and thrashing in the zero gravity. Others sat in stunned silence, trying to process the impossible reality of their situation. A few attempted to manually activate emergency systems, but nothing responded to their efforts. It was as if their ships had become nothing more than elaborate sculptures, beautiful but utterly lifeless. Commander Velthara found herself thinking about her family back on the Vaxian homeworld, wondering if she would ever see them again. The proud empire that had seemed invincible just hours ago now felt fragile and small compared to the power that held them suspended between life and death. Then, exactly 30 minutes after it began, everything came back online at once. Lights blazed to life, artificial gravity reasserted itself, and life support systems resumed their vital work. The relief was so overwhelming that many Vaxian officers wept openly at their stations. But the message was unmistakable. Humanity hadn't just demonstrated superior technology. They had proven that they could control Vaxian technology itself. The hunters had become the hunted, and the prey held all the power. Commander Velthara sat in her command chair, staring at the tactical displays that showed her fleet, surrounded by hundreds of human vessels. The 30 minutes of complete powerlessness had broken something fundamental inside her. For the first time in her career, she understood what it meant to be truly helpless. The Vaxian Empire's mighty fleet, which had seemed invincible just hours ago, now felt like toys in the hands of children. Her communications officer approached hesitantly, his face pale with fear and confusion. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're offering us options." The main screen flickered to life, showing Captain 1G standing on the bridge of his vessel. He was a man in his 50s, with kind eyes that held depths of knowledge that made Velthara uncomfortable. When he spoke, his voice carried no anger or hatred, just the calm certainty of someone delivering an inevitable truth. "Commander Velthara, I hope your recent experience has helped clarify your situation. We're not interested in destroying your fleet or killing your crew. Instead, we're offering you two choices. You can return to your empire with our message, or you can remain here and learn some truths that might interest you." Velthara found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What truths?" 1G smiled sadly. "The truth about the 847 worlds your empire believes it has conquered. The truth about what your expansion has really accomplished. The truth about how long we've been watching you stumble through space, believing yourselves to be conquerors." Something cold settled in Velthara's stomach. "What are you talking about? Our empire spans hundreds of star systems. We rule countless species across the galaxy." "Do you?" 1G asked gently. "When was the last time you actually visited one of your conquered worlds? When did you last speak directly with your subjects, rather than through intermediaries? When did any of your people actually set foot on a planet you claim to control?" The questions hit Velthara like physical blows. The truth was that the Vaxian Empire operated through a complex network of governors and administrators. Regular Vaxians rarely visited conquered worlds except for official ceremonies. They received reports, collected tribute, and issued orders through established channels, but direct contact was rare. "Our governors send regular reports," she said weakly. "Our tribute shipments arrive on schedule. Our orders are followed." 1G nodded sympathetically. "Yes, they are, because we make sure they are. Captain Lee, would you care to explain?" Another screen activated, showing Captain Lee Hyun in his hidden command center. His expression was businesslike but not unkind as he addressed the Vaxian commander. "Commander Velthara, for the past 80 years, humanity has been systematically liberating every world your empire conquered. We started with the most recent additions and worked backward through your expansion history." Velthara felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible. We would have detected resistance movements. Our intelligence networks would have reported uprisings." "There were no uprisings," Lee Hyun continued. "We simply offered each conquered population a choice. They could remain under Vaxian rule, or they could accept our protection while maintaining the appearance of submission. Every single world chose freedom." The Vaxian commander's mind reeled as the implications sank in. "But the tribute shipments, the reports from our governors, all carefully managed by us," Lee Hyun explained. "Your governors receive the reports they expect to see. Your tribute arrives exactly on schedule. Your orders are acknowledged and supposedly implemented. But the reality is that every world you think you control has been free for decades." Colonel Seo Min's voice joined the conversation from another human vessel. She was a woman with steel in her voice and eyes that had seen too much. "Your empire became a hollow shell the moment you decided that conquest was more important than cooperation. We've been maintaining the illusion of your power while systematically dismantling everything you built." Velthara slumped in her chair, the weight of revelation crushing her spirit. Why? Why maintain the facade? Why not simply destroy us? 1G's expression softened with something that might have been pity. "Because we hoped you might eventually learn to be better. We thought that if we removed your ability to cause harm while leaving your pride intact, you might eventually choose a different path. Unfortunately, you chose to threaten Earth." The full scope of humanity's deception began to crystallize in Velthara's mind. For decades, the Vaxian Empire had been operating in a carefully constructed illusion. They thought they ruled hundreds of worlds, but in reality they controlled nothing beyond their own home system. Every conquered population had been secretly freed and protected while maintaining the appearance of submission. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked, her voice hollow with defeat. Colonel Seo Min answered with cold precision. "We began planning your empire's downfall the day you conquered your first world. It took us 2 centuries to position ourselves properly, but every step of your expansion brought you closer to this moment. Li Hyun leaned forward in his chair, his expression growing serious. You see, Commander, your empire made a fundamental error. You assumed that conquest meant control, that victory meant permanent domination. But true power doesn't come from forcing others to submit. It comes from inspiring them to choose cooperation. The human fleet maintained its perfect formation around the trapped Vaxian vessels as the terrible truth continued to unfold. Everything the Vaxians believed about their empire, their power, and their place in the galaxy had been carefully constructed. Lies maintained by human technology and human patience. Your empire ended the day you decided to threaten Earth, Seomin continued. You simply never realized it because we were kind enough to let you maintain your illusions. But now that you've chosen aggression over wisdom, those illusions end, Captain. 1G stepped forward on his screen, his voice taking on a tone of finality. Commander Velthara, you now have a choice to make. You can return to your home world and report what you've learned here. You can tell your emperor that his empire is gone, that his subjects are free, and that his only hope for survival is to negotiate a peaceful transition to a new relationship with the galaxy. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle, before continuing. Or you can refuse to accept reality and discover what happens to civilizations that persist in threatening others after being shown mercy. Velthara looked around her bridge at her officers, seeing her own shock and defeat reflected in their faces. The mighty Vaxian Empire, which had seemed unstoppable just hours ago, had been revealed as nothing more than an elaborate puppet show. The puppeteers were humanity, and they had been pulling the strings for longer than most Vaxians had been alive. What happens to us now? She whispered. 1G's expression remained kind, but implacable. That depends entirely on what you choose to do next. The 848th world was never going to be Earth, Commander. It was always going to be your home world. We've been preparing for that moment for 2 centuries. The only question now is whether it happens peacefully or otherwise. As the human fleet began to move into escort formation around the defeated Vaxian vessels, Commander Velthara realized that the hunters had indeed become the hunted. The terrible truth was that they had been prey from the very beginning, walking step by step into a trap so perfectly constructed that they never even knew the game had started. The age of the Vaxian Empire was over. The age of humanity had begun.